And joining me now in studio is Marc Schulman, editor-in-chief of History Central and columnist of Newsweek. Thank you very much for joining me as always, Marc. I want to ask you, what are your thoughts on this phone call between Biden and Netanyahu?
Well, it's kind of interesting. You look at the Israeli sort of readout. It wasn't really quite a readout like the White House does, and you look at the White House readout. The White House readout talks about the summit in Sharm el-Sheikh to discuss the situation in the West Bank. It talks about the need to maintain calm in the West Bank. It then goes on to talk about judicial reform, and Biden offered his services to help mediate. I mean, just think about this. The President of the United States is not going to mediate between Israel and Egypt. He's going to mediate between the sides inside of Israel. And so we've gone a long way. And then at the very end, he said Israel, the United States will stand by Israel when it comes to Iran. Of course, the Israelis turned it on its head and talked about how the meeting was discussing Iran and how Netanyahu spoke how Israel will always remain a democracy. Clearly, Biden is not buying it any more than anyone else in terms of what democracy means. Look, Biden has always been very close to Israel. And probably the last Democratic president who has these really, really strong...
It's a misconception, right, that the Biden administration is, say, less close to Israel than Trump was. But actually, you're right. He is very, very close.
Right. I mean, Trump had never visited Israel before he became president, I don't believe.
Right.
And Biden has been here, I don't know how many times, 40, some ridiculous number of times. He has a strong, he has love for Israel, quite honestly. And the reality is he cares. But, you know, if he was in Israel, he'd probably be a member of the Labor Party or something like that. He certainly wouldn't be a member of the Likud. He's a Democrat, after all. And so he identifies with that side of the political spectrum.
I want to ask you, Marc, is a phone call from the American president effective in persuading Netanyahu of the need for compromise on this judicial reform?
Look, he's gotten phone calls from everybody.
Right.
You know, on every single level, he's gotten phone calls, he's gotten requests, he's across the board, economically, everything across the board. I don't know. You know, we're always going to ask the question, you know, we have a simple answer, it's his trial, but what is pushing him to this extent is something that we don't really understand, because by all logic, he would have taken the Herzog plan, or at least the Herzog plan as a basis of negotiations, hold everything off, and then we can work something out, because it's tearing the country apart in ways that we've never seen before. So will it be one more part? Yes, it certainly is. Biden making his position very clear. Look, if we think Iran is an existential threat right now, which certainly Netanyahu has been claiming for all this period of time, then everything else should be put by the side and said, okay, we'll deal with all these things later. Right now, we're going to do everything to make the Americans happy, to put the country together and deal with Iran. So that brings up the question. If it's so important, stop everything. If it's not that important.
Before we leave you, I want to ask you, do you believe U.S.-Israel relations are damaged?
Okay, they're not damaged in the sense that, you know, short-term they're hurt. They're not long-term damage, depending on what happens. I think if the judicial reform goes through in its present format, even with this small change in the judge selection, I think long-term it will be damaged, because Israel will not be seen to be the same democracy that it was. I mean, the Israel-American relationship is based on 2 to 3 things. One is strategic relationship, and that has nothing to do with any of this. It's the shared values. If we don't have shared values, it's a question where that stands. And it's the American-Jewish relationship with Israel, which is being damaged as well. Right. So we'll see. I'm not optimistic, but I can always hope, right? We have to hope.
Hope is all we have. Marc Schulman, always a pleasure to have you in studio.